We're continuing now with Bible 101, and this will be number 9. And of course, we will also put it in the seminary folder. Now, we are continuing with the covenants. Remember, we had a conditional covenant, which we did first. Now we're moving into what's called the unconditional covenant, which begins with David and Solomon. And this is where we left off. Now, when we continue, there's going to be a slight background of the unconditional, then we'll go the conditional, then we'll go into the unconditional. So where we left off here was when we were talking about this covenant with David, and it says, as David's son, Solomon built a great temple, from which, by the way, the Masons take their structure and rituals, which will closely resemble the Ark of the Covenant. Now, we're going to go on to David himself, because here it says, David forms a new covenant, an eternal kingship guaranteed by God. The prophet Nathan shows David as a new promise in books of Samuel and Chronicles. So those are the two books that will deal with that. Now, what are the roles of the two covenants? Now, first of all, this is the Moses covenant. That's the conditional, the 10 Commandments. Conditional covenant on the basis of Jewish life and ethics, and the formation of their national meaning, which lives through all their history and comes to influence all civilizations as the Jews become scattered after the after the loss of their homeland. David, kingship, lineage, unconditional covenant, becomes hope for throughout Jewish history for becoming a king to establish the homeland and peace. It is part of the basis for the continued struggle of the Jews to maintain and protect Israel against attacks and establish a sovereignty once and for all. Prophets also take up this covenant and see it both within the Jewish national life and beyond towards a promise for all people. See the book of Isaiah and Jeremiah as far as knowing more about that. Now, this second covenant is expressed also in the language of wisdom literature, especially in the Psalms. Now, when you go through the Psalms, you will see some Psalms that are called royal Psalms, especially Psalm 2 and 110, but there are many others, in which you see this same unconditional promised covenant. Now, it says, now we're going to go into something later, and then we'll come back to where we left off, but it says later, we will see that in Jesus, these two covenants come together. During Jesus' life, many Jewish people expected Jesus to become a king in the line of David, to achieve a political victory and finally establish Jewish homeland. This is part of the reason the Romans were keeping such a close watch on Jesus, and why ultimately they agreed to let the crowds crucify him. But Jesus took this expectation and transformed it by showing that his kingdom was, quote, not of this world. The New Testament book of Hebrews especially quotes the Psalms in understanding this new kingdom of Jesus. And Jesus also said that the covenant of the 10 Commandments was a way that could lead to eternal life. He did not deny any of this covenant, but that it should be fulfilled not only in its literal meaning, but should enter into the hearts and be understood even more in a more righteous way. This is part of the esoteric teaching of Jesus, especially the prophet Jeremiah on this internal heart covenant, and also in the book of Hebrews in the New Testament. Now, as we go forward, we are going to go back to the Old Testament. Here, we have the blending of the two covenants in a new way. One, a failure to live up to the Mosaic covenant resulting in exile, as prophets foretold. Joshua helped reform the situation when he found in a temple the book of the law, which had apparently been forgotten, and reestablished the Mosaic covenant. Israel was later to restore the land again and the temple rebuilt. This book may have been a significant part of the book we call Deuteronomy. With this restoration and rebuilding, the hope for the continual kingship takes up the Davidic covenant. Then we get into what's called wisdom. Wisdom literature, as I told you, and some of the Psalms and Proverbs. So that will be the next section we will go into. But you see here now the two kinds of covenant, how they work, and what they are and what they do with the kingdom of Israel, not only for Israel itself, but especially for the rest of the world.